Hello and welcome to this lecture on satiety and diet. In nutrition, when we talk about satiety, we're referring to the feeling of fullness. So the state of being full is what we can describe as being satiated. So if you've had a big meal and you're happy and satisfied with it, you say, I'm satiated, which essentially is the opposite of being hungry. So the goal for especially weight management is to promote satiety throughout the day. Because the notion is, if you're feeling full and satisfied throughout the day, you're avoiding hunger, because if you get so hungry, we know that the next time that you go to eat, you'll likely overeat. So we don't want you to go through periods where you're super full and then super hungry. It's a better idea to be moderately full for a good majority of the day so as to avoid overeating later on in the day. But what then is the best way to stay moderately full? Well, it's to promote healthful foods that will make you feel satiated. And that's the point of this lecture. So you know a little bit now about the macronutrients. Remember, carbohydrates, protein, and fat. But each of the macronutrients have a different effect on transit time. The nutritional composition of your meal affects how long it will stay in your stomach. If you were to have, for example, a meal that consisted of just starch or sugar, let's say you had a plate of pasta with not much else on it. No butter, no meat, just plain white pasta. That's just plain carbohydrate. Most pastas are very low in fiber. So that plain carbohydrate would convert to sugar rather quickly in your system, but then it would exit your stomach rather quickly. So you'd get really full really fast, and then it would leave your stomach quickly. In the graph that you see located on the right, you see the three different macronutrients, and then on the x-axis is how long it stays in your stomach. Okay, so after you eat it, you see a peak in your blood sugar, which would be on the y-axis, and then that would run out of your stomach, leaving you feel hungry again rather quickly. On the flip side, foods that contain protein, fat, and or fiber all take longer to exit your stomach. So if you had a meal that was just made up of fat and protein, let's say some high-fat meat, you just ate meatballs, okay, that would take a longer time for you to digest than a separate meal that just contained pasta, even if they contain the same amount of calories. Okay, so proteins and fats take longer to exit your stomach than do carbohydrate-containing foods. Now, the reality is most of the time when we eat, we're eating a combination of carbs, fat, and protein, and hopefully the carbs that you're eating do contain some fiber. So a combination of the different foods would promote satiety. But what we want to do is to avoid meals that strictly consist of carbohydrate, because we know that those leave the stomach most quickly, which leave us feeling hungrier more quickly, meaning we're going to go eat again and maybe eat too much by the end of the day. The consistency of your meal also affects transit time in your stomach. We know that liquids empty the stomach quickly. Solids will linger a little bit longer so that they can be mixed well with gastric juice and eventually become liquefied. In this way, we say that solids leave the stomach more slowly than do liquids. And there's some interesting research out there indicating that even if you have an identical amount of calories and a similar macronutrient breakdown from those calories in two separate meals, but one is liquid and one is solid, your body will actually register the solid calories in a different way than it registers the liquid calories. And we find that people who get more of their calories from liquids are more inclined to feel hungry more quickly and in turn eat more, meaning at the end of the day, week, month, year, etc., they consume more calories and in turn tend to weigh more. Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that many of the liquid calories that people consume contain no fiber and really aren't nutritionally complete. But keep that in mind. That's one of the primary tenets behind the recommendation for you to eat your fruit and not drink it. Because even with identical amounts of calories from solid fruit versus liquid fruit, we find that the solid fruit takes a longer time to exit your stomach. And that's due in large part to the fact that solid fruits contain fiber, whereas fruit juices have very little fiber. Gastric secretions are also important when we're considering what makes you feel fuller for longer or not. What stimulates an increase in gastric secretions? You learned about those as you were studying digestion. When it comes to the sight or the taste of food, even before you eat it or just as you start eating it, gastric secretions start to get going, which starts the digestive process. In addition to sight or taste, just even the thought or the smell of food can also stimulate gastric secretions, as does the process of food entering into your stomach. What stimulates a decrease in gastric secretions, meaning that your body's pretty much getting over the preparation for food period and moving into digestion, Well, that would be the process of food exiting your stomach and going into your small intestine. Let's compare two breakfasts to talk about the effect of what we eat on satiety. You sometimes hear people complain, or I do at least as a dietitian, I don't eat breakfast because breakfast just makes me feel hungrier later, more quickly. So I'm going to skip breakfast because if I eat breakfast, I just feel more hungry and I feel like I'm eating more throughout the day. My question to that person is usually, well, what are you eating for breakfast? Let's say you have a 300-calorie breakfast. Both of these breakfasts you see here, the one on the left and the one on the right, both contain 300 calories. The one on the left is a bagel. It's a white bagel, and it has jelly on it. Okay, so a white bagel has no fiber. It's strictly carbohydrate, and jelly, of course, is pure sugar, so that's also strictly carbohydrate. You've got no fat, no fiber, or no protein in that breakfast on the left. You eat those 300 calories, let's say at 8 o'clock. You feel full, maybe for a half an hour or an hour, but by 9 a.m., you're famished again. Now, let's say you switch your breakfast so that you have a little bit of a different macronutrient mix. You eat half of a whole wheat bagel, and you put, instead of jelly, peanut butter on that. The whole wheat bagel contains fiber, and the peanut butter contains fat as well as protein and a little bit of fiber. The combination of the fat, the protein, and the fiber, even though it also contains 300 calories, the same as that breakfast on the left, that combo of the nutrients and the fiber on the right is actually going to make you feel fuller for a longer period of time. So you would have that breakfast maybe at 8 o'clock on the right, but you would feel full till perhaps 10 or 11 o'clock. The notion there is that if you eat foods that make you feel fuller for longer, you're not going to be starving and run to get a donut or the vending machine or whatever it is you might do if you had a less satisfying breakfast. Fiber is one of the components of our foods that also plays a role on satiety. We'll learn a lot about fiber in this class, especially in the next modules when we look at carbohydrate. But as an overview, dietary fiber refers to plant matter that is indigestible in humans. Fiber is classified as either being soluble or insoluble. And you'll learn that insoluble fibers tend to have the most effect on your gut health, whereas soluble fibers affect heart health. But regardless, most foods that we eat contain some soluble and some insoluble fibers. But the soluble fibers in the foods we eat are particularly important in the context of this lecture topic because they delay gastric emptying. What that means is the foods will stay in your stomach for a longer period of time, which plays a role in satiety and weight control. If you feel satiated, you're going to be less inclined to overeat, which will help you achieve and maintain a healthy weight. Soluble fibers are also important with regards to blood sugar control. And we find that a diet that's high in soluble fiber may have beneficial effect on insulin sensitivity. And we'll learn more about that when we look at diabetes in this class. High fiber foods take longer to digest than do refined carbohydrate foods that are low in fiber. So when you select foods that contain carbohydrate, you should always keep in mind that you should be looking for foods that also contain fiber. Now, which foods contain fiber? Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes like dried peas and beans, black beans or pinto beans, garbanzo beans or lentils, as well as nuts and seeds contain fiber. Foods that don't have fiber include dairy foods, meat and poultry, eggs, most beverages, and oils and fats. Now you'll note most of the foods in the column on the right do contain some protein and fat. So in that regard, they will help with satiety. But if you're eating a lot of refined grains, which aren't listed on that list, but they should be, because most refined grains or white breads are strictly carbohydrate without the dietary fiber. So if you eat, for example, a cereal, something like Rice Krispies. Rice Krispies is pure carbohydrate, no protein, no fat, no fiber. That's going to exit your stomach more quickly than, let's say, if you had a cereal like Raisin Bran, which contains some fiber as well as a little bit of protein and some fat. Whenever you have a whole grain product, there's always inherently a little bit of fat. That comes from the germ in the whole grain. As individuals, we should aim to get somewhere around 30 grams of fiber a day. The average American only eats 12 to 15 grams. So most people in this country would be well served to double their fiber intake to get some of these health benefits that we're talking about. The specific Institute of Medicine guidelines, however, about fiber differ slightly from that 30 gram number. 30 is kind of a round number, but the specifics you can see here are for if you're 50 or younger, males need 38 grams of fiber a day, whereas females need 25. And that goes down a little bit to 30 for males and 21 grams for females as you go above age 51. Now, the reason why the fiber needs for males are higher than for females in both age groups is because men are at higher risk for developing colon cancer than are women. And we know that a diet that's high in fiber helps prevent against colon cancer. So regardless, you should work to get up to at least 25 grams if you're a female, preferably 30, for a male 38 grams. But again, a good rule of thumb would be somewhere close to 30 grams, and you would be doing better than the typical American by almost doubling your fiber intake compared to them. How can you eat 30 grams of fiber a day? Well, the goal is every time you eat, every meal and snack should have somewhere between 3 to 5 grams of fiber at a minimum. And let's say you eat 5 or 6 times a day, then hopefully you'll be getting close to that 30 gram recommendation. Here's a sample meal plan where I show you at each meal and snack how to add in a couple of grams of fiber. And actually, to be honest, with via breakfast, lunch, snack, and dinner, by that point in this sample diet, you've gotten 33 grams of fiber. You even have room for a snack, half a cup of ice cream at the end of the day that doesn't even have any fiber. But try to get most of your fiber in every single time you eat, as opposed to sitting down and trying to eat all 30 grams at one time, which is almost impossible, but not to mention pretty uncomfortable. Sometimes people do complain of discomfort when they increase their dietary fiber. To say things like, I learned about fiber in this nutrition class, I used to eat none, I went to eating 30, and I got all of this gas and constipation and nasty GI side effects. I think fiber is not worth it. Okay? There's a couple of tips that you can do or employ in order to avoid the side effects that we sometimes see with increasing dietary fiber. The first one is to go slow. Add a couple of grams every couple of days. If you eat 0 grams of fiber most day, you can't go to 30 overnight. To gradually add a couple of grams each day to allow your body to get used to having that fiber in there, especially because for some of the types of dietary fiber, we don't digest them, but actually bacteria break them down in your colon. And if you're used to having no bacteria present because you have no fiber, if you go up to 30 the next day, you're going to have all of this bacteria showing up that's going to, through the fermentation process, cause a lot of GI discomfort. So first tip, go slow by just adding a couple of grams a day. The second tip is to add a lot of water. You need a lot of water, especially for the soluble fibers, to absorb in order to contribute bulk to your stools and promote motility. That's what helps prevent against constipation. If you go from 0 to 30 and don't put enough fiber in there, you're going to have this huge indigestible mass of plant remnant stuck in your colon that basically can't float its way out. So if you're increasing your fiber to 30 grams a day, you need to make sure that at a minimum, you're getting at least 2 liters of water, and some people will actually need more. The third tip is to exercise regularly. One of the primary causes for constipation is inactivity. So if you put the combination of go slow by adding a few grams a day, drink a lot of water, aiming for at least 2 liters, which is 8 cups a day, and thirdly, staying physically active, you can get the benefits of dietary fiber without experiencing some of those side effects that I mentioned.